Welcome to another edition of the ATM News. This week, we're going to talk about nice guy personality disorder. God bless the manosphere. If introspection is what you're after, it's the place to be. Nowhere else can you go sit in your shit like the online forums devoted to your discomfort. As with anything, the endeavor becomes a question of balance. How much is too much? In this ATM News, let's talk diagnosis, self-diagnosis, even personality disorder. You recall the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. When you visit the manosphere, as I'm apt to call it, the tendency to personally adopt what you encounter there might seem beyond your ability to resist. Consequently, you're likely to bum yourself right the fuck out. Bear in mind that the very definition of anxiety and depression is rumination over the self, according to Jordan Peterson. Which brings me to this nice guy syndrome. Is it narcissism? Not necessarily, though by degrees, narcissism may play a role. More importantly, is it a personality disorder? Here, a far more nuanced approach needs consideration. Why? The truth is that men who present with nice guy syndrome can have a mixed bag personality disorder. Most don't, though. The vast majority of men don't. Referencing the quick study psychology at DSM-5, let me give you a personality disorder overview by starting with one that's rarely ever talked about and which very few know even exists. It's called the general personality disorder. It includes enduring patterns of inner experience and behavior that significantly deviates from the expectations of the individual's culture, is pervasive and inflexible, originates in adolescence or early childhood, stable over time, and leads to clinically significant distress or impairment in one or more important areas of functioning: social, academic, occupational. Holy shit, you might think. That's me, you might be saying to yourself as you read that or as you hear this. It's broad in scope and almost applies to anything. I hate to say it, but there's a lot fucking more. Here's some more personality disorders. The paranoid personality disorder comes with a pattern of distrust and suspiciousness of others, such that their motives are interpreted as malevolent. Schizoid personality disorder is about being socially detached with restricted range of emotions interpersonally. This fella prefers solitude and may have flat or expressionless affect, with a preference for abstract intellectual pursuits like math, mechanicals, or computers. It seems to me nowadays we call such types neurodivergent and toss them under the autism spectrum banner. Now then you get to the antisocial personality disorder, and that requires a pervasive pattern of disregard and violation of the rights of others, beginning in the first 14 years of life and into adulthood. Deceit, manipulation, exploitation, impulsivity are typical, with decisions made capriciously, with very little planning. Now, the borderline personality disorder is all about instability in personal relationships. Self-image, affect, that means your emotional state, and impulsivity. From early adulthood, they actively avoid real or imagined abandonment with perceptions of impending loss, rejection, separation, abandonment, external stability and structure producing profound alterations in self-image, affect, cognition, and behavior. End of quote. The histrionic personality disorder comes with pervasive and excessive emotionality and attention-seeking behavior, originating in early childhood in a variety of contexts. This person feels uncomfortable and underappreciated if they're not the center of attention. They can be melodramatic, histrionic, and flirtatious. The narcissistic personality disorder, here's one that you're used to. This has a pattern of grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy early adulthood. They often exaggerate their self-importance, they're conceited, they're boastful, and they tend to overestimate their abilities and their accomplishments. On the other hand, the avoidant personality is preoccupied by disapproval, social rejection, and criticism, and comes with chronic feelings of inadequacy and hypersensitivity to negative evaluations from others. They might avoid interpersonal and social settings from fear of being exposed, ridiculed, or embarrassed. The need for constant reassurance, security, acceptance leads to isolation. The dependent personality disorder needs to be taken care of, which makes them submissive, clingy, and as a result of their fear of rejection, separation, and abandonment, this person believes they cannot make it on their own and begs nurturance and caregiving from others. As a result, the most mundane daily decisions require advice and reassurance from others. The obsessive compulsive personality disorder has repeated, unwanted, and intrusive thoughts and images, which they try to counter by using other thoughts and actions. Typically, they feel compelled to use unconnected, repetitive, ritualized actions for more than an hour per day to lessen their obsession-caused distress. So there you have it, a mixed bag of Group A, suspicious or lax interests in others, Group B, dramatic, emotional, and unpredictable, and C, anxious thoughts and actions. The question I have for you is this: how many of these various personality disorder characteristics mentioned overlap with the nice guy syndrome? I bet you noticed immediately. When I was in college studying behavioral science, my psychology teacher used to warn us about first-year students' disease, something common to both medicine and psychology. She went on to tell us that students find out about one disease or condition after another. The tendency is to see that illness or symptom in themselves. This is natural. We have self-interested brains. Maybe you think suggestion has little effect or won't work on you, in which case you'd have to believe that the whole advertising business out there has no persuasive power over any of us. If you think you can't be sold, you may be fooling yourself. Remember what Tony the restaurateur told me from Cornwall, Ontario, those decades ago, and it's often quoted in Sipping Fear, Pissing Confidence, the book I wrote for you. When he said, "I believe anyone can be walked, Chris, it's just a matter of approach." Just like advertising, much of the manosphere uses persuasive copywriting to convince you that you are fucked up and need their help, all justified by good intentions and useful solutions, I'm sure. The truth is there's usually at least some, if not much more, merit to what's being sold. It's also not just online activity directed at men. It's a wide trend the world over, multiplied in the digital era. Nice guy syndrome is male immaturity. That immaturity is a product of the system, something that's been accruing over the last 200 years. And you can look up, you can go to advisortomen.com, you can put in the search men at work, and you'll get an essay that'll give you a full accounting of it. But know this, it's not your fault. And you should know this too, it is your responsibility. You see, a child is 50% internal and 50% relational. He arrives with an inborn temperament and is shaped by the caregivers in his surroundings, in his environment. If you ask parents what's the same about their children, they'll start telling you what's different. Each of us is unique, a one of a kind. You are run by your nervous system with conscious awareness along for the ride. The integrated nervous system denies, distorts, and represses inner and or outer reality in order to lessen anxiety and depression. Both of those, anxiety and depression, can be viewed as losses of faith in the future. You were created in your mother's womb as a part of her. You were only birthed at 9 or 10 months due to the limitations of the birth canal. While you developed inside her, the placenta in which you grew took over her nutritional pathways and directed that nutrition towards you. 100 years ago, the greatest killer of children was infectious disease. The number 2 killer was infanticide. Women went into the forest or jungle to bear the child, and if she didn't like the look of it, or she had too many kids already, the child was left to the elements and the animals. So once born, you lost all placental support. It is the greatest sales job on planet Earth that in the moments after your birth, you had to sell your mother on feeding and caring for you. You pulled that off by crying, cooing, clutching at your mother with tiny fingers, barely able to reach her, and then suckling. And most of all, she smelled you. Her olfactory bulbs, they connect directly to the brain. And women often tell me about that newborn baby smell and how they still remember it. You put a spell on her. The inseparability of mother and child persists in varying degrees for life in something called egocentrism. This is the inability to differentiate between the self and another, restricting an individual to their own perspective. The brain, nervous system, is self-interested by default. Egocentrism occurs on a continuum, where at one end is the child who, for survival's sake, must believe the world revolves around him in order to justify his right to mom's love, security, shelter, sustenance. At the other end is the adult male who has been forced by circumstances to retain a high degree of pathological egocentricity into adulthood, and which then persists, often for decades, to the detriment of himself and all those persons around him. So, egocentricity is the child's response to his environment and remains in degrees in male unless it is replaced by masculine power and love as he grows into adulthood. Only the world over, those forces are mostly missing from the modern male's upbringing, which means women are left to make men. And I'm afraid that'll never happen. Women aid and abet the male's egocentricity for survival's sake, often unable to see anything unnatural in his dependence on her. She's following nature's dictates after all. So it falls to you to realize that a man matures emotionally when he stops looking for love. He's reversed the flow, unburdened by that caregiver spirit. He holds deep reserves of ancestral power and love in defense of meaning and freedom. I'll explain more of that, perhaps, in a future newsletter. When a man does this, he'll be loved, but he remains unconcerned. Men feel love on the way out as powerful defenders of life. He goes from placental to parental support to building himself into a man of character. This is nature's way, and so it falls to you. If you have any questions, you have any comments, holler at me. I'll be sure to answer. Send this to someone who needs it and subscribe to our newsletter. In the meantime, brothers, stay powerful, true, and free. And thanks for listening.